There are currently 10 different exhaustion perks that survivors have at their disposal, so today we're going to be ranking all 10 exhaustion perks from worst to best. As always, let me know if you disagree with any of these in the comments down below, and feel free to also comment your list and let me know which exhaustion perks you guys think are the weakest and strongest. But with that said, let's jump straight on into the list. Coming in at the number 10 spot for the worst exhaustion perk in Dead by Daylight, we have Background Player. Background Player is still a relatively new exhaustion perk that was released along with Renato, Thalita, and the Skull Merchant in early 2023. Background Player is also a very unique exhaustion perk based on the activation effect. It activates whenever the killer picks up another survivor, making it the perfect exhaustion perk for those who enjoy bringing a flashlight as their item of choice, or it could also even be used in a Sabo build. The reason Background Player is the worst exhaustion perk is because it's the only exhaustion perk that can't really be used in chase, meaning all 9 other exhaustion perks have a huge advantage over it since they're able to extend the length of the chase. It does, however, only have a 20-second cooldown, which is a nice bonus since almost all other exhaustion perks have a 40-second cooldown, since it's unlikely the killer will ever be able to down a survivor, carry them to the hook, then down and pick up another survivor all within 20 seconds. Overall, Background Player could still be a decent perk for those wanting to save their friends with flashlights or Sabo saves, but since going for frequent flashlight saves is often a very inefficient way to play survivor, along with the fact that it doesn't do anything whilst you're in chase, make it easily the worst exhaustion perk in the entire game. Whilst not as good as Background Player, Overcome is still a very weak perk, all things considered. Overcome activates after becoming injured, then you receive a 2-second speed boost, and Overcome has 2 major issues which really hold it back. The first of which being the fact that it only activates for just 2 seconds, making it the exhaustion perk that activates for the least amount of time, which obviously means you'll create much less distance than you would have with other exhaustion perks. And the second major issue with Overcome is that not only do you have to be healthy in order to use it, but it is impossible to use if you do get insta-downed by the killer, since you don't get put into the injured state. This means that it is vulnerable to certain killers such as Myers, Oni, Ghostface, or even Plague, as well as many more. And it is also vulnerable to killer perks and add-ons that insta-down survivors, such as Make Your Choice, for example. Headon is a very gimmicky exhaustion perk, and it activates by jumping into a locker and allows you to exit the locker whilst the killer is standing in front of it to stun them for 3 seconds. Whilst Headon doesn't give you a speed boost like many other exhaustion perks, stunning the killer for 3 seconds is almost the same as having the speed boost, since you have a few extra seconds to run away and gain distance on the killer. Not only that, but Headon can be an extremely fun perk to use, especially when used in a Swift. Whilst I'd much prefer a traditional exhaustion perk with a speed boost, Headon is certainly a better exhaustion perk than both Background Player and Overcome, which earns itself the spot at number 8 on our list. Moving on to our number 7 spot, we have the Nicolas Cage perk, Dramaturgy. Dramaturgy is a very random and inconsistent exhaustion perk since it has multiple different effects. Dramaturgy, much like Overcome, can only be activated whilst you're healthy, making it a bad exhaustion perk against the Plague if you are looking to stay injured all game. However, one of the major things that it does have over Overcome is the fact that you can still activate it against insta-down killers such as Myers or Oni, for example. Once you press the activate ability button whilst healthy to activate Dramaturgy, a small animation will play for 0.5 seconds, then you'll gain a 25% haste for 2 seconds. After that, one of 4 random things will happen. You gain another 25% haste for another 2 seconds. You scream but nothing happens. You could receive a completely random item with a random rarity and also random add-ons, or you could become exposed for 12 seconds. And this is the only real bad effect that you can get. So since the odds of becoming exposed are only 25% and 12 seconds not being that long of a duration, this makes Dramaturgy not only a very fun but also a very respectable exhaustion perk that can be pretty decent in chase. Much like Background Player, Smash Hit is an exhaustion perk that leaves you exhausted for just 20 seconds, instead of the default 40 seconds like other exhaustion perks. However, unlike Background Player, Smash Hit is a very good exhaustion perk that also gives you a 4-second speed boost whenever stunning the killer with a pallet. Many people avoid using Smash Hit as the obvious counter for the killer is to just start respecting pallets. However, this can certainly be used to your advantage when the killer does start respecting pallets. You can then start to greed them and get extra loops in at each tile, resulting in wasting much more of the killer's time in chase. Smash Hit is one of my personal favorites, and whilst it doesn't quite make it into the top 5, it is easily deserving of a spot at number 6. The reason Smash Hit isn't any higher on the list is because of the obvious counter that killers have just by respecting pallets. Like I said, that may result in you being able to extend the chase and get extra loops in at each tile, but that doesn't change the fact that it will be very difficult to activate against a killer who has a bit of a phobia for pallets. For this reason, I do enjoy using Smash Hit in combination with other exhaustion perks so that you always have an exhaustion perk available to use. Moving on to our number 5th spot, we have a perk that's fallen massively from grace, and that is Dead Hard. Dead Hard was once a fan favorite and the most popular exhaustion perk in the entire game. However, in recent times, behavior has given Dead Hard nerf after nerf after nerf. Although whilst it is nowhere near as good as what it used to be in the past, Dead Hard is still a very strong exhaustion perk and one that can completely save you from going down, especially now because it is much less common, so this also means the killers are going to be less likely to be expecting it. Dead Hard activates after you've been saved from the hook and whilst you're currently injured, which means you can only use it a maximum of twice per trial, but it does allow you to gain the endurance status effect for 0.5 seconds after pressing the activate ability button whilst injured. And this obviously means if the killer hits you during that time, you get to take that additional hit without going down and will instead be put into the deep wound status effect. Much like Smash Hit, Dead Hard can also benefit from being used alongside another exhaustion perk, since you can't use it at all until you've been put on the hook for the first time, and even after that it's still only a maximum of 2 times per trial. Despite this, however, I definitely think Dead Hard is still deserving of a spot just inside the top 5 exhaustion perks in the entire game. Much like Dead Hard, Adrenaline is also a perk that has been nerfed, and Adrenaline activates after the final generator has been completed, or if the hatch has been closed by the killer after all your teammates have died before completing all of the generators. It heals you up 1 health state and also gives you a 3-second speed boost, and this is one of the parts that has recently been nerfed. The speed boost has gone down from 3 seconds, whereas beforehand it did used to be 5 seconds. However, despite this, Adrenaline is still a very strong exhaustion perk, and whilst it isn't a traditional exhaustion perk, it does have potential to completely save you at the end of the game, and multiple adrenalines on a single team can change a losing position into a winning position within an instant. Moving on to our number 3 spot, we have Lithe. Lithe is an exhaustion perk that is very simple and easy to use. It gives you a 3-second speed boost after performing a fast or medium vault on a window. Lithe is an amazing exhaustion perk for the newer players, but the main problem I have with Lithe is that for experienced loopers, it can often be a bad exhaustion perk to use, since once you perform a fast or medium vault in chase, you are forced to move away from that loop if you would like to get value out of it. Whilst not a deal breaker by any means, using Lithe at Shack, for example, can often be an annoying experience for those veteran DBD loopers. One other way around this is to keep the exhaustion meter at 99%, which means you can then choose which window you would like it to activate on, giving you much more control over the perk overall. I do think Lithe is often overrated by many players, as a lot of people will say that it is by far the strongest exhaustion perk in the entire game, and whilst I don't agree with that, Lithe is still definitely one of the better exhaustion perks in the game, just due to how simple and easy it is to activate, whilst also being extremely effective at wasting the killer's time. Moving on to our second best exhaustion perk in the entire game, we have Balanced Landing. Maybe I am a little biased since Balanced Landing is personally my favorite exhaustion perk to use, but hear me out first because I do have many different reasons for Balanced Landing being great. So Balanced Landing activates after falling down from distance, then gives you a 3-second speed boost, whilst also reducing your stagger by 75%. Balanced Landing is one of the only 2 exhaustion perks in DBD that you have full control over at all times. For example, Lithe can activate at a window that you didn't want it to, forcing you away from the loop, and killers can bait you out of the locker if you're using something like Headon. Balanced Landing doesn't have any issue like this, as it is 100% your choice when to fall down from distance and activate it. On top of that, it is also completely uncounterable by the killer. They can't wait it out the way they can with Dead Hard, for example. In my opinion, Balanced Landing is a near perfect exhaustion perk with almost no weaknesses. I say almost, as some maps have a limited amount of spots available to use Balanced Landing, which is the only slight weakness that the perk does have. Despite this, however, most maps do have many different spots to activate Balanced Landing. For example, maps with main buildings or indoor maps that have multiple stories. Overall, Balanced Landing is by far my favorite exhaustion perk to use, since it works great either on its own or in combination with other exhaustion perks, and it can also be enjoyed by both newer players and experienced players. At our number 1 spot, as I'm sure many of you guys would agree, we have Sprint Burst. Much like Balanced Landing, Sprint Burst is another exhaustion perk that you have full control over at all times, whilst also being a near perfect exhaustion perk. However, no exhaustion perk is perfect, and the slight issue that Sprint Burst has is that it can be a pain to keep the exhaustion meter 99 so that it's always available to use. However, if you can master this, you'll find yourself with the best and most efficient exhaustion perk in the entire game. Although if you are a newer player attempting to switch over to Sprint Burst from another exhaustion perk, or even just new newer to the game in general, be sure to not fall into the beginner's trap of walking around everywhere to avoid wasting sprint burst. Instead, try to get good at using it up when you don't need it and keeping your exhaustion meter near 99% whenever possible. Definitely don't fall into the trap of being scared to waste your sprint burst, as this will result in just wasting way too much time for you and your team, which obviously gives the killer much more time to kill you and your teammates. Another great thing about sprint burst is that you can repair a generator in a complete dead zone and still be 100% safe, so long as the killer doesn't have the perk Mindbreaker, which prevents you from regaining exhaustion whilst working on a generator. A perk I definitely recommend using alongside sprint burst is the perk Vigil. Vigil allows you to recover from being exhausted 30% quicker, making it much easier to keep your exhaustion meter at 99% for sprint burst. So that is my list for ranking every exhaustion perk in DBD. Feel free to let me know your list in the comments down below, and also feel free to let me know if you disagree or agree with any parts of this video. I hope that you all have a great week, and I will see you all next week for the next one.